Hey there, this is Tom Mason, and welcome back to week 2 of the Sculptember challenge, where I'm trying to get back into the habit of using ZBrush. And, well, I shouldn't even say habit, just, making sure I know what the heck I'm doing. So I started this week by continuing work and finishing this little mace that I started in the short kind of first part of, what is this? Sculptember. Playing around with a lot of ZModeler to really kind of control my shapes and make things very, have more controls over the angles and proportions and stuff like that. It's a lot less sculpting and more of engineering, but it's a lot of fun. And you can make some really neat shapes with the cool way that, what's it called? Dynamic subdivide, I think. Oh yeah, and I think one of the videos that you just saw in the beginning, one of the clips, was the one that I actually lost last week. Somehow when I loaded the program, it recovered it, and I was able to put it in here. So yeah, I'm just adding some final little details. Oh, and darn it, I thought I could have sworn I recorded that. I ended up sculpting a little bit and adding wraps. But anyways, but the main thing I've been working on this past week is starting an actual goblin character. So here I'm setting up the spotlight, which is a spotlight overlay, which is a great way you can actually import a little image and it'll just sit there in the corner, so you can have it as a nice reference. And I've been following, this is kind of, so gosh, I'm jumping around. I like to sculpt in kind of general large shapes, and just to really get the look of the character down before there's any detail. And there's a ZBrush sculptor artist named Shane Olson that takes us to a whole nother level. Does really great, beautiful, stylized characters too. So I was watching some of his videos, so it's not super far off the way I work already, but I've been trying to very deliberately follow kind of the ways and procedures he goes about doing things. And I'd recommend that to a lot of people, I think, because it's very easy to get caught up into jumping right in and just sculpting out a bunch of details out of a sphere, and that's great, and it is good not to let yourself get bogged down by things, but it's also very helpful to focus on the general form of the figure. So this was taught me a lot about how to use and manipulate this new gizmo tool, which was brand new to me, and also how to try and translate some of these goblins that I've sculpted, 5 of them by hand already, how to translate that back into to digital. Let's see, not sure what I was doing there. Oh, I skipped ahead a little bit. I think I was experimenting with a couple different ways of adding in the spheres and the extra little bits of digital clay. Here I am trying to scale it up. This goes back to what I said before. I'm trying to kind of scale this character to make him the right proportions to match the other goblins. Now, I took a lot of time on this, as you'll see from this clip, and painstakingly was trying to get, okay, I gotta get it, the head's gotta be this big and the body's gotta be this big. And when I got done with it, I actually didn't care for it so much. Something seemed off about it. I have my originals in my hands, and I'm looking at them and like, what's wrong with this? And so I actually ended up going back and measuring the originals and realized that I was pretty far off, mainly in the head, the proportions of the head. So you'll see that coming up in a little bit. I go back and kind of redefine this guy, and I actually liked the look of it initially. It wasn't until I started putting in the arms that just something seemed off, and I'm not even sure it was bad, but since I have some pre-existing models that will go along with these, I wanted to make sure that they matched. So I had to go back and change some things. So I'm using a special tool, insert multi-mesh tool, to put in these shapes. When I used to sculpt, the way I started was I would bring in a poly sphere. I think it was like the quad sphere. Just has to do with how the edge loops are set up and the points, the vertices and whatnot. And I would basically keep one of those in the actual tool itself. This whole thing is called the tool, and then every part of it is kind of, every layer is a subtool. And so I would just constantly copy them again and again and again and just so every part, everything was based off a sphere. But the Shane Olson, who you just saw 3D character workshop in the background on this ruler that he made, he has this cool multi-mesh which has an additional primitive, which is more of an elongated thing. It's nice when you're to have, so you aren't having to stretch a sphere every single time. You have something that might be in a slightly different shape already. So here's where I realized how far off I was. I have this ruler, and it's set up in the scene to be 200 millimeters tall. So I don't know if this is the way I'll end up working. I have another way that I usually scale figures, but this would work as well. And the reason I wanted to try this is it's supposedly set up to be optimized for ZBrush in the way in its actual working environment. Too much to talk about there. It'd be very boring, but I hope to someday be able to explain that as I get more familiar with it and to the point that I can actually teach. But that's where I realized that the proportions were off, and so I changed the head size and got them scaled up to close to where they're going to end up in the end. And this is kind of my typical 20 millimeter tab that I like to work with, and I was just messing around with that, trying to make a quick reference guide so I don't always have to have that big giant ruler up. Trying to use the Z modeler tool, and it's not cooperating. All right, well, that's it for this week. I'll see you next time, and remember, keep sculpting.